UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military black projects, false flag alien invasion psyop, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join UFO historian Don Ecker, MUFON State Director for New York Chris DePerno, retired veteran pilot Commander Cobra, and well-esteemed host and researcher Martin Willis as they discuss the latest news and topics regarding UAPs with a no-holds-barred approach on UAP Crossfire.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to KGRA Radio DB. My guest host tonight's with me, Martin, Chris, and Don. As you know from the run-up, we have, I would say, very unique personalities, but I definitely am on the shoulders of giants in the UAP, UFO experience, research, and I would say thinking. We really enjoy it. In fact, I will give you a little of the insider information. When the producer, our esteemed Bill Skywatcher, who really is also should get a credit for creating this show when he started to approach all of us that a while back that he wanted to put this show on. We were having a little jam before he came in to take over the studio and bring us on. And he was kind of like ducking behind his desk saying stuff like, are the bullets not flying? Is anybody shooting in my direction? Sort of that Clouseau, is there anyone hiding in the dark kind of routine? And we all had a good laugh. We all get along very well as friends. As you probably have subtly picked up, we have a few subtle differences from time to time on stuff that we talk about. And we actually have a lot of laughs on the backside. Now, on the serious side of the show, we dig in deep, and where I guess would say we're not afraid to trade a little direct high energy exchange. But it's been a pleasure, and I wanted to say that because this show will probably be the last live show that we're going to do for this season, getting ready for the pickup on the new year. So I just wanted to say an esteemed thank you, and it's been a real pleasure working with you officially, you three, on this show, and it's been a real joy. So thank you very much for the fun that we've had, and I'm looking forward to more fun when we jump up. Also, a quick hello on the admin notes to the greatest audience on the planet. That was my old tagline that I used when I had a show previously on KGRA, and I enjoy getting emails from a number of the old fans who have taken heart to drop me a line at the old show email. Eventually, I'll probably be bringing some new features with Bill to KGRA aside from this show. All right, gentlemen. One quick thing before we jump into this is part 2 of our discussion on Whistleblowers. I asked, and most of you had seen and had some opinion on Mr. Grosh's On the Hill interview, talking about his life being a nightmare since he came forward and did the whistleblowing. And Martin, I'm going to start out with you because I know that you have direct recognition on this. I was taken back just a tiny bit, and I'm not overly surprised when he said, I was an intel officer for 14 years. I was inside. I knew all those kinds of things. But he never says why he stepped out, why he decided to be a whistleblower. And he still continues to talk like he's talking with people that are authorizing what he's talking about. It's a very strange kind of whistleblower kind of approach. I haven't seen any others, sort of like, someone who's maybe a whistleblower in organized crime saying, well, I was talking to the different crime families, and they have allowed me to talk about this situation now because I'm still in contact with them. That seems strange to me. Your thoughts?
Well, I actually have direct contact to confirm what you just said, because I actually connected. I talked about this before, and Jonathan Wygant, who was on my show, the ex-Marine that came upon a crashed craft. He's only talked about it twice, once on my show and once way back with Stephen Greer, Leslie Kane, and James Fox all recorded him together, believe it or not, in 2001. So those are the only times he's talked about it. So through Mike Herrera, who was talking to Grush almost on a daily basis, he basically connected and said, what's actually Grush actually watched my interview, talked to Herrera, told him to watch it, and then he checked into it with his sources. And I have a screenshot of David Grush basically saying he checked with his sources and that Peru thing did indeed happen. It's not, in his words, he ain't lying, So now getting back to the main question, I know part of your question was, is it unusual that he's talking to these sources still? It kind of makes you question what kind of sources these people are that they'd be talking kind of outside of how they're supposed to be talking. Isn't that kind of a curious thing to any of you people, why he would still be talking to people?
Having a couple rounds into the world, if you revealed, sources and information, usually number one, you wouldn't have sources and information to go to anymore because you've kind of burned the bridges. People and assets and links, unless it's kind of a psyop kind of thing, unless this is something that you're trying to pepper or put information out. Now, it could be something really beneficial in my mind. It could be, but it could be rather complex. To get this to happen, you got warring factions within different agencies, departments, groups, whatever, that are fighting back and forth, and they're using this as a way to get the information out. What throws me off is the kinds of statements that are made, and it doesn't seem that there's any reflection that, hey, let's do the tally sheet. Does this add up? And not explain it. People who will go, look, this is what happened. I took pictures, but someone stole the camera, or I went to develop the film and it didn't work in the age when we were using film, or I had the files, but the files were erased. They usually have like an explanation of they did all the normal stuff and then some kind of conspiracy thing happened afterwards. This one doesn't have those kind of boundaries. That's what kind of catches my mind. Don, I saw you nodding, so I'm going to jump to you. What do you think?
Well, okay. 30 years ago, actually 33 years ago, around 1990, there were ostensibly two intelligence groups that were vying for UFO information. One was, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this one, the MJ-12 people. But another group popped up that called itself COM-12. COM-12. Now, the front person from this group that came forward was a strange character. His name, that he was going by, was Michael Younger. Now, I knew this guy. Actually, he tracked me down through a very close, very dear friend of mine, Richard Saraday, which, Deuce, you're Commander Cobra, you're familiar with Saraday.
Yep.
And this guy had information before any other logical way this information would come out. He was hooked into somebody. Now, these people were butting heads all the time. Now, this Younger guy ended up dead out here in LA. He was found sprawled across some railroad tracks. Very, very strange thing. So my point of talking about all this is that there have always supposedly been two competing groups in government. One that wants to get information out. The other one does not. Now, the bottom line with Grouch, I got to tell you, I got to the point with David Grouch, and hey, I'm not casting any aspersions on the guy because he's been very upfront from day one, saying that this is secondhand information. But my bottom line with him is somebody is playing this guy or had been playing this guy. And ergo, I got to the point where I will put anything this man says in my gray basket and keep it there. I believe nothing that comes out of his mouth, nor do I think he is lying. But I'm just going to hold abeyance with anything coming from this guy. There's too many questions about it.
I think that might be
That's
intentional.
fair enough.
I think that. I think that might be intentional. I think that might, the delivery method makes me think that's on purpose. Chris, you've been around this professionally and in law enforcement as well as with MUFON.
Well,
come on.
First, Martin wanted to say something, so go ahead, Martin, before I get into my rant.
No, I just think we're all avoiding the elephant in the room. David Grush looks really good with a beard now. I'm joking.
Okay.
Did anyone notice he grew a beard? Did anyone notice he grew a beard? And I got a haircut.
Yep.
Yeah.
You did great. I want to know who your barber is.
That's where I think.
And I took a bath today, Martin.
I knew it.
There you go.
Something. I knew
if that doesn't put ratings higher, I don't know what will. Now, if we could only get pictures, the video, for the after show would be really where it's at.
All right, David Grush. Well, let me tell you this. After we talked for a week, I started making some phone calls. And I talked to a person who I consider an extremely credible person. And he told me David Grush is credible. But he's credible on the information that he's given by other people. Now, these other people are in the government. Now, the problem is, whatever David Grush says, he has to brief, and they brief him. And he admitted this. And this is, I want to play this last tape. We didn't play it on the last week's show, but I want to play this short video where he explains this.
Not going to break the seal on anything we've discovered or anything like that. And yeah, it's a place I can't go to.
How limited are you in what you can discuss and what you can't discuss, and why?
Yeah.
Why do they let you discuss any of this?
Yeah, so anything sensitive that I want to say as it relates to like U.S. government activity, whether it be intelligence stuff, military stuff, etc., I have to submit it through what they call DOPSR, DoD Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review. That is something anybody who's been an intel officer, anybody with like a clearance, has to submit that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, if you're writing a book about gardening, you don't have to. But if you're going to talk about anything military and intelligence related, you have to submit. So it's kind of a catch-22 for this office, right? They're only looking at it from a security perspective. They're not vouching for it or anything like that. And that's like any author, right? They could write a book about Navy SEALs and they're not vouching for the story. They're vouching that you didn't say any nasty code words. You didn't burn a specific ongoing classified program. And for them, I mean, I'm not in their OODA loop, but certainly it's a catch-22 for them where if they want to redact and they propose a redaction, they're like, hey, Dave, you can't say these sentences. You can rewrite it and resubmit. You know, we can't necessarily tell you what agency said to redact it, but you're not allowed to say this.
So this is essentially one of the very early ones, 1933.
Mm-hmm.
How many crash retrieval incidents have there been?
It is double digit. The specific numbers I do know. However, I can't discuss that. And I know it sounds like, oh, I'm being coy or whatever, but you know, this show, any other interviews I do, right? You know, foreign intelligence services are watching, and it's like, I'm not here to help Russia and China calibrate their intelligence collection. Like, oh, Dave said it's this number. We missed a couple. Shit. Let's put it out for the KGB, SVR, and GRU are now going to hit the streets to try to figure out which ones they miss.
So,
Which, by the way, gentlemen, you can bet your bottom dollar and your tushy ass that we're also being reviewed.
Sure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
More
Now,
watchers.
I wanted to throw in, Chris, before I jump back to you, Carmine in the chat room said, "I thought the government worked for we the people." Yes, and I think if you want to see violent agreement with 4 people on this show, that is held. Most of us feel that this is not, that we've gotten pretty far off the mark on we the people. The other thing that he brought up in there, it's always interesting when folks are put to the wall talking about having to get the clearances, and I'm familiar with it. He happened to mention Navy SEALs. And I don't know if any of you have read No Easy Day. That was the book that talked about the bin Laden takedown. And that author, that Navy SEAL, lost the $6+ million that book made because he did not get that clearance.
Wow.
He did not run it through. And to avoid jail time, he had to give up lifetime profits, everything associated with it. So they're serious when they go after people on that. There's no doubt about it. And he did not burn resources in there because if that had happened, I'm sure he would have got it. But he bucked the system, and the system decided to show that. He also made an interesting remark. I'm sure some folks inside the chat room know it. He said, "I'm not inside their OODA loop." I'm just curious. Do you gentlemen know what the OODA loop is? OODA.
No.
OODA. It goes back to Colonel Boyd. Johnny Boyd was probably one of the greatest military tacticians of our age. Died a very obscure, retired as a colonel. He created tactics and revamped Air Force tactical flying. And he's revered. The funny part is, the whole time I was in the Air Force, I knew nothing about this guy. The Air Force pretty much walked away from him, but the Marines loved him because what he taught was this: observe, orient, decide, act. And he talks about this being a loop. So if you look up OODA, you'll see all kinds of people have taken this, and it really does apply to UAP, and it applies to the things that we talk about, because it is a very interesting way of organizing how people see things, orient themselves, decide on a course of action, act, and then this loop, as soon as you act, you get things that you're observing again, and the process starts over. He quantified that. So when you hear that OODA loop thing, it is now taken on kind of, people are in. And as Don was saying, we're in the OODA loop for certain agencies that scan these kinds of shows, blogs, discussions that are going on, because open source intelligence gathering is like the hottest thing you can do right now, because you don't need people with clearances to do it. You can get a whole bunch of people and go, okay, I want you to do nothing but be on KGRA, KCOR when they were still on. I want you to look for blogs. I want you to look at transcripts and look for these keywords. And often agencies will put things into the media stream to see how different people talk about it. And it has some really good practical applications. You have a state leader coming to make a visit, you announce it, and then you watch to see what groups in an area start to react to it for the possible, security countermeasures that might need to be taken. So swinging back to you, Chris, and Mr. Grush.
Well, I was going to say that David Grush, he's openly admitted that he's been briefed, and he briefs them, they brief him what he can and can't talk about. Because, he had mentioned it, Roswell. Everybody was talking about, well, why can't he talk about Roswell? He's a whistleblower. He's a whistleblower with limitations. And he's being told, and yeah, you
I gotta stop you. And Martin, Don, jump and correct me. That's not whistleblowing. He's a press agent. He's a spokesman. He is someone.
Yeah, I call it a whistleblower with limitations. It's the same thing.
Yeah, you talking about Grush?
Yeah,
he
I
went
just
through
don't
the
see Grush.
whistleblower process. He went through the legal process of whistleblowing all the way through.
But he's still talking to the people that he's blowing. I mean, whistleblowing.
Yeah.
Did you just say that?
It was an accident. Freud would say I did it on purpose.
Okay.
I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm gonna carry on. So I call it whistleblowing with limitations, because one, he's getting information from government sources. Now, you don't know if those government sources are leading him or not leading. Like Don says, he's been open and saying that he's getting secondhand knowledge. He doesn't have direct knowledge. So who's to say somebody in some back room is saying, tell Grush this, tell Grush that, tell Grush this.
All right.
You know,
So
don't tell him this.
Well,
Don't tell him that.
if he was talking about this purported Italy crash, all right, and it's within the UFO, and I got to tell you, I still get a little irritated at this UAP designation. You know, for 70 plus years, it's been UFO, and suddenly some brain surgeon decided we got to change it. But be that as it may, okay, the Italy thing is bullshit. Okay, I hope that's one of
most
the
of us would agree.
red words they're looking for, Commander Cobra. Bullshit. But okay, so if they fed that to him, they had to know ahead of time that this was bullshit. So what was the purpose of that? To throw something in the mix that would automatically discredit part of what Grush is saying? I think that very well may be it.
Now, since you're on this line, try this on. Tell me how. Try it on. See how it feels. Button it up. Is this some kind of modern presentation of the X-Files where Mr. Grouch is Mulder? Because Mulder, although on the show had experiences, he had sources that came to him from inside the government, and he was putting that information out, trying to prove it, trying to make it happen. Is this what we're seeing? He was a tool.
He was used. He was a tool at times.
Oh, Mulder
was that right?
Mulder was a tool for years on that show. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But that was fiction. This purportedly is the real deal. And I got to tell you, I think Grouch is, in fact, not much more than a tool. He's a tool that's testing the waters. Okay. Look, most people today involved in this field, quite frankly, don't know their ass from third base. Okay. They've got very little idea of what has gone on in this field for the last 65, 70 years. You really have to have a broad knowledge of the history. And most people don't deem it important enough to go back and do the research into people like Ivan Sanderson, Donald Kehoe, Dick Hall, people like that, okay? And probably a lot of people, they hear those names, and with the possible exception of Kehoe, Sanderson, Dick Hall, who the hell was that? Well, they were giants once upon a time. They're all unfortunately now gone, okay? They've left the building. But those were the guys that put in place the foundation that everybody here tonight is standing on. And what they did in the past is very, very important. And most people are not aware of it. So when you talk about some of these cases going back to the 50s, like, for example, in 1954, all right, do you know that radar, government radar, picked up 2 objects orbiting the planet? This was 3 years prior to Sputnik 1 being launched. There were 2 objects that came into Earth orbit, took up orbit. And when the word got out, and it was reported on in the newspapers at that time, scientists were talking about, well, these are probably asteroids that somehow, mysteriously, we've captured in Earth orbit. When we finally go to space, hey, we could use those as stepping stones to go out into the solar system. And then these 2 objects mysteriously disappeared. One was 400 miles out, one was 600 miles out. Were you guys aware of that?
Yep.
How did they detect them that early? I mean, did we
Radar.
have that capability then to go
Yes.
out that far?
Yes,
We did.
radar.
It wasn't the other part that Martin, as I remember the reports, is that the speeds that these demonstrated before they did this orbit and how they were behaving, there were multiple stations that picked up this activity, and then they compared it. And I think that the reason that the asteroid kind of parking into orbit came into part of it was brought into the discussion because radio astronomy was really starting to take off at that point, post World War II, which uses radar and the signaling as well as listening to anomalies and changes in the background of the noise that is present in the solar system and ultimately the galaxy and universe. So there was the degree of accuracy I would question given the times, but not knowing our history dooms us often. And in this particular discipline of discussing UAPs and UFOs, it's very costly. Very costly.
I want to ask one question to everybody.
Just one? Mark it down, Martin. This is his one
Mark it
question.
down, just one. Okay.
And then Chris is out of Crossfire after this. Okay, go ahead.
Has David Grush, anybody ask him what his intent was to bring this out to the public? I have yet to hear anybody ask him that. I may have missed it, but he has not fully explained why he's doing this. Lou Alessandro said, hey, I'm doing this because I got frustrated. I got upset. I was totally disgusted. This is a career officer of the United States Air Force who had a brilliant career. Everybody says this guy is a straight shooter. He's got a great career. He's an up and rising person. This is a guy that could probably end up a general. And then he comes out with this. I mean, in the back of this guy's mind, he's got to be thinking, if I'm doing this without people's permission or not doing it, think about this. He's going to screw his career.
Yeah, that's
important.
exactly. You're exactly correct, Chris. This is a career killer. Like during Vietnam, an officer that chose to go into special forces, okay, it was great if he would go into special forces for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, but then you get the hell out. Because if you don't, the mostly straight-leg generals would look at something like this. This guy is too unconventional for our country club, okay? That would be a career killer. He probably wouldn't make any more than full bird colonel, and that was the end of his career. So yeah, Grush shot himself in the foot with this. There's no doubt.
I'm going to take it on the face of what he has indicated, that he did it because he believed he had to do it. He did it because he felt he had a moral or an integrity issue that this information had to come out, and he's been careful not to discuss areas that have any possibility of putting people that are in other programs in danger, meaning proving how something happened or discussing something that would ever put units that are still or line of program.
Yeah, but CC.
Hold on, Chris. Here's the other part, though. Okay. What's he doing for his money now? What's he doing now for his financial security now? Where's his money? Is he still drawing a paycheck from the Air Force?
That I don't know. I mean, that's a good question, and that leads up to the question that I had. Is he drawing a paycheck from the Air Force? Who's backing him now?
Right.
You got to think of these things before you become a whistleblower.
Is he writing a book?
And put this stuff out here because he's got a family and everything.
I personally don't know. I don't think I think if anyone thinks that they're going to make money off of the circuit and talking about it is crazy, because that, you know how that goes. I mean, a lot of people think there's money in this, but there's really, yeah, it's laughable. But oh,
I'm
by
just
the way,
thinking about
this is what I'm
the
talking about.
fancy digs that the four of us are in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Ask me.
Yeah.
I made a freaking journalistic career out of it, and yeah, lots of
Well,
money.
Don has always said if you want to make a little money in UFO research, start out with a big pile. That's what Don has always said. If you want to make
Yeah.
a little bit of money, start out with a really big pile.
And you could end up in prostitution before it's all said and done.
Lazar. We're talking about Lazar again. So
Oh,
no. So here's the thing, though. You got to think about this. I don't know. He had his career. Now, how long was he in the service? Could he possibly draw a pension from that eventually, from his time in the service, and
Not
then
unless
intelligence?
20 years,
At 14
20
years,
disabled.
right, he could have a medical retirement situation in there, but 14 years generally falls short without some kind of very special. Usually at 17 and a few months, there's some maneuvering that can be done occasionally, and you pick up your pay. He could be a reserve officer. I just throw out all those parts and pieces because when I look at it, I'm very much, I think we're in complete agreement with everybody. There are things that he says that I find interesting. There is mannerisms that I don't like. There's mannerisms that throw me off. And when I try to do what I always say that I do when I look at these things and step back, it seems to me to be a very active information line. It seems to be a very active process that he is going on and going through in the way he talks about it.
Now I'm wondering this about him. There's that connection of people like Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, all these guys that are kind of like out there doing their thing. And I'm wondering if and then Hal Puthoff, I believe, and maybe a few others, where they all stay in touch. And I'm wondering, Semivan, I think, is one of them too. But I'm wondering if all these people are like in touch and talking to him at some point. A friend of mine in the UFO world, I don't want to mention his name because I don't have his permission to tell that he said it, but he thinks that a lot of Grush's information was from the former Bigelow group over at the ranch. That whole science group over there, all those guys. So, but that wouldn't be, he was part of the team investigating UFOs. So he was not before Arrow changed its right. Wasn't he involved in that?
I believe
he was out there.
I think he has said that he was.
Yeah. So his job was to investigate the UFOs, but I don't know where he was getting his information. But I would say, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I would say there's more of a chance than yes than no for me that these crashed vehicles may exist in private hands. I still think that's a very good possibility.
Well, if they exist, and I do believe they do, they are in private hands, corporations like Lockheed.
With no oversight. Yeah.
Okay, no oversight. Not responding to FOIA, nothing like that. It's locked up tighter than a June bride's virtue.
Well, if you think about it, there's reasons that you would do that. So if you have FOIA come along and FOIA is not convenient, I noticed there was a really interesting, and it's a comment that I love in the chat, where it talked about why would the government hold back on technology? Well, I can give you a lot of reasons why government would do that. You can always throw the national security flag up, and that gets a little bit overused. But if you have economy set up and you now have something that's going to completely upend those economies. It's going to completely upend and change everything and how it goes. The folks that are now making money, controlling the politicians that are dependent on that source of income to maintain their political entities and lifestyles, you're going to try to structure any kind of a turnover. You're not going to jump over to anything else until you have proper, controls in place so that it's just a transfer. The guys that were running horses didn't probably see that the automobile was going to come along and displace them. And then when it did come out, it was only the very rich that could afford it. And you have a guy like Ford who comes along and says, no, we can make this and the masses can have it. That completely changed how economies were driven. And what did we learn? Well, we learned in that mass production of making a fairly complex technology of the day, internal combustion engines and vehicles. We learned how to mass produce that. Completely changed the course of where we were in the Industrial Revolution to bring us to the point that we are now. And that was also applied to other types of things. That's why Detroit, one of, if not my most favorite city on the planet, the one that we owe the great win that we had in World War II, because that city is the reason why we were able to produce the armaments that allowed us to prevail in World War II. So take that back to extraterrestrial technology, ET technology. You slowly break it down, but you do not want to follow the Constitution. You don't want to follow freedom of information, liberty to find out what's going on, and what you're being asked to pay for in your taxes. So you come up with a nice legal cover-up to say, well, this has been turned over. It's been leased for X number of years to company X, corporation X. I'm going to use Acme, the guys that outfitted Wile E. Coyote, the genius Coyote.
Yeah.
Well, Acme has this technology, and Acme, as a private entity, doesn't have to respond to FOIA. And you can, and going back to something that you all brought up earlier, if you talk to people and convince them that they're telling the truth, they'll pass a polygraph. It can be a lie. People lie on polygraphs, but they think they're telling the truth and they believe it and they pass the polygraph.
A sociopath can. Yep. As well.
That's not
a sociopath can pass.
Right.
Oh, I've seen regular people pass a polygraph, because if you put a truth between two lies and make it convincing, that your mind sync will register that as a truth. I've seen it on polygraphs. I've watched polygraph examiners know that what they're telling is not true, but in their hearts, they believe it. So CC's right on that. You can pass a polygraph, and that's why they're not admissible in courts.
And I've heard the other direction. People coaching people so that everything they said comes out as a lie. They can't get a good measure on the polygraph, because even when they say earnestly what their name is, or they identify their birthday, they say it and they have got themselves into an emotional state that they won't pass. So it works both ways. And obviously, techniques are for different types of interviews. That's a nice word. Interviews, a nice, not interrogation, interviews. We're not having it in for an interrogation. Martin, can't you believe these two, our other two ghosts? It's not an interrogation, Martin. Commander Cobra, it's just an interview. Come on down.
I like interrogation. I like the word interrogation. What do you think, Don?
Chris, somehow I knew that.
Why not? Why not, Chris? Why not?
All right. Shifting gears just a little bit. We'll continue to discuss Mr. Grouch. I would like to meet him. I'd like to have maybe a little one-on-one to understand him a little bit more. And I think that
I'm just saying, I'm sorry. I just did that to say hi to Chris Lambright. Everyone knows Chris Lambright. Great researcher. Said hi to you.
And where's Chris at?
Chris is in Texas. He's a longtime researcher. He's really great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I want to bring up one of my favorites. Commander Fravor, United States Navy. We all know he made the circuit many years after the events with the Nimitz battle group. I do not know Commander Fravor. I do know a number of fellow naval aviators. I worked with them that knew him when on active duty. And this guy has one of the most solid, consistently good reps I've ever heard. CO, outstanding pilot, excellent leader. When I listen to his voice on the released clips and the tapes, it sounds completely natural, believable, real to me, everything that's going on there. You all know my feelings and my conclusions on the TikTok.
Tic-tac.
TikTok. Listen to me. Again, I'm doing it. Thank you, Martin.
I thought you went Chi-Com there for a minute, Deuce.
Well, at least you kept it G-rated this time, CC.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. The knives are out so close to Christmas, too. I'm a little bit surprised.
It's the holiday season. Brings out the best of me.
So what do you think? What's your feelings on Fravor? I'll start with you,
Who do you want
Mr.
to start?
Ecker. Yeah, Mr. Ecker.
Okay. I've got no heartburn with Commander Fravor whatsoever. I think he called it exactly as he witnessed it. I saw the clips from when he was flying, when he encountered those things, when his electronic equipment picked those objects up. Your theory on what they probably represent, I've got no heartburn on that either, with the possible exception of the electronic intelligence vessel that was out there. I can't remember the ship's name now.
The Princeton.
Okay, the Princeton.
I interviewed a few of the guys off the Princeton. I'll bring them up in a bit.
Okay, that saw in excess of what they believe to be at least 80 of those objects. The technology that was demonstrated coming down from 80,000 feet and stopping on a dime right above the surface of the ocean, that within a few seconds, a couple of seconds, that blew me away. And God, I hope in fact we do have that technology. That was that was impressive beyond measure. But yeah, I think Fravor is a squared away, straight ahead guy.
He has continued to do a lot of discussion. He's got some great stuff that's been put out onto the YouTube channels. He's consistently stayed with the story. He hasn't gone out of any lanes. And I don't think there's any other really greater motivation than he has than to relay it. Often when I see him speak, and like I said, I really look forward to one of these days to meeting him face to face. He reminds me of other UFO experiencers that I've been around and have had the opportunity to talk with. Folks that are very convincing to me are people whose stories are, maintain a very strong consistency, that when you ask them or when they're asked questions over, in some cases it runs decades, but when you ask them questions, they don't suddenly remember something or it changes. They consistently say, no, I didn't see this, or I'm not sure what happened there. He has that. The other part, Don, I want to bring up, and then I'm going to bring it up to Chris. You have rightfully hammered the Air Force quite a bit as the service here that has been the least forthcoming with information. And the Navy has now gone out and pretty publicly put out the form that will be used for these kinds of events when they come up. But it was a very interesting time period that the Navy went through off the coast of California with the Tic Tac versus the TikTok. We don't want to get those two confused anymore because I want Martin to mess up his really good haircut trying to keep me straight. And the other part is there was another series of drone events that occurred from this time period of TikTok all the way up to present times. We've had a number of events that have gone on. And I think that that's also part of military exercise and activities going on. And one of the interesting things that happened was the sailors that somehow were allowed to use their phones to record some of those events and how those were made and uploaded. You notice that hasn't occurred since then. I have some theories about that. But Chris, I swing it over to you. What's your feelings on Commander Fravor?
Well, I look at Commander Fravors. This is a great investigation because it's got all the elements to show that it's true. This is probably one of the most perfect UFO investigations that you go. First, you got an impeccable person. He's the commander of the Black Aces, which is a highly regarded air wing of the U.S. Navy. So he's the commander of it. So, I mean, for him to come up with a cockamamie story, I just can't fathom that for him to do such a thing. That's number one. Number two, they corroborate a story with other pilots who've seen this. So you got him having direct evidence and other pilots having direct evidence that have seen this take place. So, I mean, you got people collaborating his story. Then you got Kevin Day, who's on the USS Princeton, saying these things were dropping. They're going crazy. They're switching down, going from 30,000 feet to 5 feet above the water in a partial of a second. So you have radar stuff that has disappeared probably by now, but you got Kevin Day's testimony about the most sophisticated radar picking this up. Here's the only problem. There's two problems with Fravor's story that I really want to know. And we discussed one of them, CC. Is that our technology? Now, at first I said, no way. Absolutely no way that's our technology. Then I started talking to people like Michael Schratt, James Goodall, and a few other people. I wanted to talk to people who have investigated military aircraft. And James Goodall has said, we got stuff that can go Mach 14. And this was years ago that can go Mach 14. And I was like, whoa, we know in the 60s we could remotely fly planes. We know that because the CIA did
World War II, you were remotely flying planes.
Right. But I mean, they really sophisticated it in the 60s because they wanted to start a war with Cuba. So they wanted to remotely fly planes. So we know that remote control vehicles can be done. So that way we can increase the propulsion. We can increase the speeds. And that's why James Goodall was saying, hey, we have things that can go Mach 14. Then I talked to Michael Schratt, this guy takes every inch of military stuff. And he is totally convinced. He won't tell me how he knows, and because he wants to keep that secret, and I respect that. But he believes that some of our bombers, some of our stuff, absolutely has anti-gravity that they can hover, especially some of the new bombers that came out. But he is totally convinced that some of the stealth stuff that we have has the ability to hover, has the ability to go at super speeds, to do all those things. So I started changing. I said, wait a minute, if we can do this stuff, if we could take a thing like a Tic Tac and make it remote and be able to maneuver this stuff at incredible speeds, this might be our technology. And that's one of the things that, you and I talked about, where I now believe the Tic Tac. Now, somebody said, well, there was talk before, wow, we would never do that at our own military. But then I started thinking, what's the perfect way to turn around and deny it? Is by using it on our own military, by doing it, because one as one
there's a long history in the United States, and I think every country on this earth that has subjected their military and their military members without their knowledge to advanced weapons. You have to look any further than looking at
everything.
Above ground atomic detonations And before they did it, they had troops digging foxholes and trench lines. And then after the explosion, they were told to get up and run towards the explosion. We released biological weapons in the subways of New York. They weren't killing, but they were designed to track how the colds were moving around in congested areas. We've done it to our own public. So there's no surprise we did this. And if you want to not provoke a war and you want to demonstrate a capability and let everybody else see it, that seems to make a pretty good way to work. I wanted to draw up real quick, and Martin, I'll turn this over with you. Christian Lambert puts in the chat talking about how come the backseater has not been spoken to. And he talked about why is it Fravor's gun.
Well, what about Alex Dietrich? She talked. Where is that?
But yeah. Alex she was very quiet for a number of years.
Yeah. Yep.
She would only be identified as his wingman.
I don't know where that I didn't put that up. I don't know how that came up. Sorry. I was looking for Chris Lambrights and clicked on that. I'm sorry about that.
But the one part about what's seen, that's his wingman.
Yep.
And I believe she went on to have a fairly outstanding career herself. I can understand why people do not want to be publicly identified with this, especially if they're trying to maintain a military career.
She's at a university now. So I know we only got about 5 minutes, but do you want me to jump in on my thoughts of this?
We can carry it over on the other side, so you can have it on both sides of the hour.
That's right. So here's when I was there, you can see, if you see in the background, you see some jerk holding up an iPhone. That's me. I'm holding that up. I'm filming the whole thing.
Right I can see your glasses. Yeah. Obviously, you did not go to the haircut specialist for that.
That's right.
Like
it's pretty shaggy there. Yeah. So here's how I feel. I don't think, by the way, I thought David Fravor made an excellent presentation that day. And I thought he was very, very, I put him as top notch as far as a witness and everything, and very, very believable in every which way. I do believe. I don't know, though, Commander, if I'll ever agree with you. I try to keep an open mind, or Chris, that I do not think this is our technology for so many ways. We're going back 20 years or so, almost 20 years now. And where is it? Where has it been all this time? Why wouldn't we know more about it at this point from back then? First question. Secondly, could any of our technology ever hold together with the type of G-force? And I know you're talking about some type of gravity situation that they perfected. And I'm interested to know more about that. But I don't understand why, it would seem like it would be something very, very expensive. And why were there 80 of them, if that's the case? And why did only one of them come down or two of them come down at any given time? What would be the purpose of having 80 up there, floating around at less than 100 knots? All right, that's kind of my questions.
Well, I could give you a long list of answers to all of them, based only on my opinion, my analysis. No hard fact to go with it. But I think the number one thing you brought up is cost. This is probably prohibitively expensive, and it might be, again, going back to on a technology side, so absolutely unbalancing to the rest of the world's condition right now. Very much we like the fact that we have the kinds of controls that we do. And let me just go one step further. Now, really step out on the limb here on this. Let's say we do have this technology. It's very limited. It's very expensive. And just like Star Wars forced the Soviet Union to destroy themselves. They spent everything they had because they were so terrified of what Star Wars represented, that their missiles, if fired, were going to be knocked down before they ever left the territory of the Soviet Union. It completely threw off mutually assured destruction, the whole basis of how international affairs were run. And then we had a couple other things. We perfected stealth and the integrated air defense system of the Soviet Union, which had been sold around the world to what we would call bad actors, was totally disarmed. It was taken out by the 117. Why so few? Because I don't think they're operational aircraft. I think they're very limited aircraft. I think they're research aircraft. I think they have the ability to do a number of things, but they do not have unlimited capabilities. But when they do operate, they operate at a completely different level. We had an aircraft called Tacit Blue. Tacit Blue, sometimes referred to as the alien school bus. You can see it at the Air Force Museum. You can't touch it, but you can walk up to it pretty darn close that you could touch it. I will tell everyone, I know that when they put them on display, they do alter some of the shapes and designs because they have caught people at the Air Force Museum doing espionage, taking measurements, taking pictures, taking shapes. So the alien school bus, Tacit Blue, flew and developed a lot of the stealth technology, improved a lot of the stealth technology. And if you had seen that flying, it would have had the same treatment that you receive with the Tic Tac. There's no doubt about it. But that aircraft never went beyond being a very expensive and well-run research program. So I can give you some answers why I think it goes that way. I will always cede to the argument, what was the source of this technology? And one last piece. If when you're flying almost any airplane, but especially a conventional type aircraft like a jet, and you zero out the G and add maximum thrust, you get the capability that you see that the Tic Tac does.
Time to go to break.
All right, folks, we're at our break. We will see you on the back side. Chris DePrano, Martin Willis, Don Ecker, and Commander Cobra. UAP Crossfire. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back.
We are back.
To UAP Crossfire. Welcome back to UAP Crossfire. I'm Commander Cobra tonight with Chris DePrano, Don Ecker, and Martin Willis. We've been discussing whistleblowers for this week and last week's show. We've been talking about Commander Fravor, United States Navy fighter pilot that had the Tic Tac experience and really became the point person that described most of it early on. I wanted to just take a quick step before we picked it up where we left off, Martin. I am going to throw out tonight anybody who writes, quote unquote, the best email message or however people, they can get me on my old Task Force Griffin email. I'll let Martin, whoever sends the best one in, and we'll judge behind the scenes. We will make sure that they get a KGRA DB membership. And if they're already a member, I will get it bumped for another year. So your reaction to our show, I'll be more than happy to make sure that that's sponsored. You're looking at the 4 judges that will judge this essay that wins. And if we can't decide, like we can't decide if the Tic Tac is ours or theirs, then there'll be 2 winners. We'll work that out. But that's up for grabs. Anybody who wants to play with that, go with it. Martin, we left off.
Start working on that. Yeah.
Well, no, Martin, I'm not going to get you a DG, a KGRDB. Come on.
Okay. All right.
If I you know what, I'm gonna leave it there because
You're hard, Goose. You're awfully hard.
Yeah. Well, I want a T-shirt at least. Anyway, another question I have for you on the whole Tic Tac situation is why were the data bricks taken from the Hawkeye, that were delivered in the Princeton safe? Why did, and maybe Air Force personnel or whatever it was, land and scoot them off? And another point I want to make with that is when Kirkpatrick said that we're not going to look at the Tic Tac case in any way because we, all the information we have out there is all the information that you have on YouTube, and that's BS because they have the data bricks that the radar that covered those Tic Tacs when they were up in the sky.
If you're going to run an operational test, a lot of the things that happened around that sure seemed to be well planned. There were protocols established on the Princeton and other parts of the Carrier Battle Group, not surprising, that material, and I'm speaking with the guys that were in CIC, and one of them, he didn't have what I would say is one of those, he wasn't a radar operator. His job was to be responsible for those kinds of tapes and the equipment that made the recordings and how it's stored. He was one of the folks that we talked with on the show, and he explained how quickly people showed up that were within the complex of the Carrier Battle Group, the Princeton itself, meaning that there's protocols established. And that's no surprise to anyone here that, if certain events happen, there are plans. There are, you flip open a book, you go to a checklist and you follow that. We've talked about that in other aspects about how the plans used to be talked about if an extraterrestrial landed at a military base, what the military was going to do, how they were going to respond, how they're going to, set up security, all the things that go with that. So it doesn't surprise me that happened. It tells me that it was something much more planned, much more expected, with the swiftness of how it was handled, how quickly it occurred, how quickly that there were people there to gather that information and to make that happen. And there's a long, and I'm going to say, well-documented history, and it's not all nefarious. We had Air Force officers and Air Force personnel that were undercover, that were in North Vietnam during the war with journalists and other people to get close to our prisoners, to get proper assessment of POWs, and to try to gather intelligence to see who is there, their condition. These were things that occurred, and I'm very happy that we did it. But if you have that skill set, it can easily be applied to other situations that are maybe less, what we would consider, or myself, I'll speak for myself, less noble in suppressing the truth. No doubt about that.
Here's something I'd like to add too, Martin, that has always made me strange that I thought this was our operation, because in the course of history of people in the government seeing UFOs, what have we always told them? Keep your mouth shut. You're not supposed to talk about this. You don't mention this to anybody. You don't take it home. You don't do it. This was completely different. They took the tapes, but when Kevin Day was interviewed and he explained this to me, is that there was no warning, no nothing about not talking about it. You want to talk about it, talk about it. Now, why, if this was such a critical thing that we've seen in ufology of people being threatened, why weren't these guys? Why wasn't Fravor told to shut up? You don't talk about this. All right. Why weren't this? Because they wanted this out. Now, I will tell you that when I was in the military, there was disinformation plots, and one of them would be, let's scare the Russians, let's scare the Chinese, let them say, holy cow, because in the back of their mind, somebody's running the Xi Jinping going, do these guys really have this technology? Do we know? I mean, they're calling it a UFO, but is this thing theirs? Which exactly what Commander said about Star Wars. It blew the Russians right out of the water when Reagan started talking about Star Wars and all the stuff that, we're on the verge of creating. They went bonkers. Why were these guys not told to shut up?
Well, I think that is curious, and that has happened in a number of cases and situations like that.
It sure has.
But do keep in mind that we didn't hear about this for 15 years after it happened. No one was talking about this. It wasn't out there. It wasn't public knowledge. I mean, that the one video escaped at some point. I believe it was through
German. Lou. Right. Well, you had Lou, who.
But before Lou came out with it, it was brought out.
What I'm saying was that there was a lot that was come out. There was parts of it that had been, that had been leaked out there. And I look at that at the time period that went on, Martin, and that's what makes me draw the conclusions that I do. Quickly, I want to put a hold on you for Martin. Don, I got a quick question for you. Who was the PhD doctor that you had recommended me have on the show who talked about the nuclear annihilation that occurred on Mars, his theory of activity?
Dr. John Brandenburg. But I got something I want to say
Hold
first.
on. I just want to say First Coast Crypto in there talks about that a little bit in the comment section. And Dr. Burroughs had Brandenburg has a very interesting theory on that. Go ahead, Don. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine. Look, you made a very prescient acknowledgement about this thing having gone on about 15 years. Now, we have to give credit to Christopher Mellon as the guy that released the videos initially, okay? Right. It was Mellon that did it. Now, Mellon had been an Undersecretary of State for Intelligence. In other words, he worked with all the military intelligence organizations, DIA, whomever. Now, Mellon was also a part of Unidentified, that series that ran on the History Channel for several seasons.
Correct.
Now, I watched that series religiously, and not to be titillated by it, but I wanted to see exactly what these guys were up to, where they were heading. And I've said it to all of you, possibly not Martin. I don't believe Martin and I ever discussed that, but I did with Chris DePerno. I did with Hugh Commander Cobra. And I famously said a few weeks ago that those guys at Unidentified were either doing one of a couple of things: giving somewhat of an advanced warning to the American public that something may be coming down the road toward us, or it's the biggest dog and pony sex show since the Bay of Pigs invasion, okay? Now, with that being said, I've been thinking more and more and more about that. And my bottom line is, I think this whole thing right now is being coordinated as a dog and pony show. Not only the Nimitz battle carrier group sightings, but Mellon. How would Mellon have gotten those covert black budget videos? He took them, for God's sake, to the New York Times, okay? They were played across television. My God, of all people in the freaking United States that got this story and ran with it. 60 Minutes, who on any other day would have turned their nose up at a UFO story and vomited. Okay, they're famous for that. How many really shocking cases have come down the pike in the last 60 years that they have never even as much as acknowledged that happened? Not to mention the nuclear base overflights and interference with nuclear weapons. So, where I'm at right now, I think this whole thing is a dog and pony show. And the whole discussion about disclosure is more smoke and mirrors. I'm not sure what the end game is. I'm thinking about that even as we speak. But I am convinced that this, quite frankly, gentlemen, is all bullshit.
Do you believe in Project Bluebeam, Don?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe in Project Bluebeam? There's been a lot of talk about Project Bluebeam lately.
I'm not sure what that refers
to. A fake alien invasion.
Oh, look. Let me tell you a quick little story about that.
It's a bizarre story, but it's coming out more and more.
Over the years, one of the more fringe personalities in the field that would often come out with theories like that is Dick Hoagland, Richard Hoagland. When I broke the STS-48 story, first on NBC, then on Larry King Live on CNN, it wasn't a week, maybe a week and a half later, Dick Hoagland called me. And that was, by the way, an election year. Okay. George Bush Sr. was running against Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot had thrown his hat into the ring. Okay. So we had a three-way contest going on there. And Hoagland called me up and he said, look, he said, I am convinced that that object that you think was a UFO was actually a Pentagon drone. And they were running a test because George Bush Sr., I am convinced, is going to stage a fake alien incursion, invasion, military incident, so he can declare martial law and subsequently push the presidential election to the side. Well, we all saw how that ended up, right? The next president of the United States was William Clinton. So no, I've been hearing those kind of stories for years. And I mean, my God, I've been banging my head around in this crap for 35 years. And I got to tell you, I'm very skeptical when I hear stories like that, Chris.
But you have to admit, one of the most studied mass hysteria events was Orson Welles broadcasting
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
That was way, way, way overblown.
Done. Well, it was way overblown for a lot of people outside the area of metropolitan New York, New Jersey. But for the folks that were in that area, it was not overblown.
But look,
it's been a very well-studied propaganda piece.
We were also on edge for a number of reasons.
Absolutely.
Number one,
right now everything is really calm. Everything is really, really good. The world situation right now is so much better than the 30s.
The Imperial Japanese, the rape of Nanking, okay, the Nazis,
okay, Hamas, Israel, Ukraine, the crap going on in the Philippines, China, which has replaced Martian.
Oh, thank God you're sarcastic. I was going to ask you to take a drug test.
All right, let's reel it in, guys. Let's reel it in.
Well, wait a minute now, Martin. I still have my hands on the reins here. I'm coming back to you.
I know it is.
I want to bring up the next
We're
piece.
getting way off. Yeah, all right.
No, we're not getting way off. I totally disagree with that. This is such a mishmash of horse shit. It's unbelievable. Okay.
All right.
Now hold on. I don't think we can. I don't think we're supposed to say horse shit, but I don't know.
All right. That's two now that you both get a mark in the book for saying horse poopy. So I'll stop it. Now,
how about bullshit?
I want to bring up John Burroughs. He did a book, The Weaponization of a UAP. And it's interesting how Don, and it wasn't on purpose, but John is top notch to me. I truly have been blessed with a really good friendship with him. Talked at length with him on what he went through. Very interesting case. But have you read his book? And more importantly, if you haven't read his book, have you at least read some of the reactions to his book?
Oh, I've met John Burroughs. I've interviewed John on my show. I'm very familiar with how the Air Force screwed that man around to the point where they would not release his medical records.
Correct.
That he literally had to go to Senator John McCain's office have
Correct.
McCain intervene, okay, in order to get his record. His medical records, for my God, had been classified. For what possible purpose? That in itself told me that something unforetold had happened with that man at Bentwaters. Okay. Now, I also had admiration for John Burroughs for something else. And that was another individual that for a short time had been stationed there, that for a while took over the reins of the whole Bentwaters story and really ran it into the ground. A guy by the name of Larry Warren, who was a total fraud, a total bullshit artist, a total liar, and a real stain, okay, on everybody's underwear. Yeah, I said it. I can say it again if you want. But Burroughs was fearless in exposing him. He not only did that, but Warren also besmirched the commanding, well, not the commanding general, but the commanding officer, the colonel there of that facility, the base. And Burroughs did yeoman's service. But yeah, that man was screwed around in a major way. His health suffered quite a bit. And then they tried to stop him from getting medical assistance. Look, you know, this is another reason when somebody 50 odd years after I came back from Vietnam, when somebody comes up to me and says, thank you for your service, I got to say, well, I appreciate the thought, but hey, you're 50 years too late. So, you know, it's just one of those things. It's a quirk I have in my personality. There it is.
Well,
right,
what
well,
if they
hang
were
tight on the
born
quirk.
like 15 years? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Martin. Oh, stop. No, Don. Go into holding pattern. Martin, I want your take on Mr. Burroughs and Mr. Burroughs' book, if you have one.
I have not read. I've had John on my show a number of times and actually had long conversations with him on the phone. I have not read his book, and it's just because I don't read as much as I used to. I'll be honest, but I do have a lot of UFO books to read. I have, I don't know,
Sure.
20, lined up. But
what do you think of John's experience, and do you think it was extraterrestrial?
I believe it most likely was. Something affected his heart. He had that trouble. That probably. I mean, like what John just said. Why would his medical records be classified? That whole situation was so bizarre. I mean, just really weird to begin with. But I mean, that whole incident is so weird, and I got in trouble, big trouble. I don't know if I should even bring this up, but it had involved that whole case, and I better not bring it up because I was threatened that I was going to get sued for defamation. But how can I get sued for defamation if I'm telling the truth? That's the problem.
Well, we do live in a wacky world, despite what Don thinks. I think
what the hell?
What the hell? In the 30s.
I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. It's going to get us a little off track, but I'm going to say it.
Martin, off track.
Yeah, it's going to get us off track. So I was standing right next to Charles Hull. I had someone else with us. We're all in at a conference down in North Carolina back in 2013. And then he said, he was talking about, it was a terrible thing what happened. And he goes, and it happened to me too. And I said, what happened to you? He was talking about them getting drugged with their, when they were debriefed. And he said, and me too. I said, you were actually drugged too? And he said, yes. And it was right there and I mentioned it on one of my shows. Robert Hastings was watching and called me up the next day and he says, you're going to get sued for defamation. I says, He says, I'm a good friend of Charles Halt. I said, get him on the line. Let's do a conference call. So we did. And Charles said, oh, I didn't say that. And I said, I was standing right there talking to you and you said it. And he said, well, I believe that you think you heard me say it. That's where we'll leave it. But I've never heard a word from Hastings again ever since that time. So that's off track.
Martin, you asked me about where does things go technology wise if my tic tac theory holds any water, or in this case doesn't hold water and is anti-gravity. Initially, when I looked at Bentwaters and Rendlesham, I really concluded this was extraterrestrial. After talking with John, in fact, John and I have spoke directly about this and study on this and the reaction. In fact, somebody in the chat here said it as well. I'm convinced that this is another part of the technology, and those guys were irradiated with the field that was put up on this vehicle. And I lean much more strongly that you're looking at a series of vehicles that were doing this kind of experimentation and operational test and evaluation, maybe even trying to do active work with the amounts of power that's needed to drive these systems to make them work and to do what it did. And it doesn't surprise me that they had the kinds of physical reactions. The fact that his medical records were classified doesn't surprise me either. Depending on where you're at, that happens. But generally, what doesn't happen, that happened to John, and is a real aggravating situation to me, is that dummy records are made up, or a set of records are made up that allows you to seek the treatment and get what you need for treatment, but not disclose where it happens. It's verified, but it's not descriptive to the point that would compromise any kind of an operation. It happens a lot. It happens a lot of times with in the military for people for citations. They receive an award. They're allowed to wear the award, but the actual decoration, the statement that goes with it, is never seen in the public because of where they were, what they did when they occurred. Chris, your thoughts on John Rendlesham?
One thing that I think that Don will agree is that if the VA awarded him his disability, and what people don't realize is you have to go to hell and back to get that disability. If you think the VA just says, okay, we take your story, yeah, you're now disabled. It don't work that way. I'm a disabled vet. I have bad lungs because of my job in the service. And took me 15 years to be able to be awarded a disability. And they take you through this test and they interview you for this and they go, it is a unbelievable you have a better chance to get into the CIA than to get a disability from the VA. It is a tough, rigorous, and grueling process to be awarded a VA disability. It just doesn't.
And speaking of the Veterans Administration,
let me just finish this one thing real quick, Don. So that says to me a lot that John is telling the truth, because the hell he had to go through to get that is unbelievable. And then after he got it, they classified it, as you guys talked about, tells me that they got information that said this guy, stumbled onto something, whether it's UFO, ours, whatever, but it's all legit. You got to give it to him. And with the condition, this is all shut up. And there we go.
To all the military veterans out there, be you Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, whomever.
Space Force.
Did I mention Air Force and Space Force? I just read a news article today that, and I'm not getting political, but a number of Republican lawmakers are now taking a look at the current Biden administration, accusing them of siphoning health care money out of the Veterans Administration in order to treat illegal undocumented aliens now flooding into this country.
Space
And
aliens?
as a twice wounded combat veteran, I got to tell you, that bothers me a great deal.
I don't think you'll find any disagreement with being bothered by that. I don't think anybody here would disagree with that, but that is the reality of the situation we are against in the current situation. That budget is only going to go so far, and the Veterans Administration is always a convenient pounding block for this. It's pretty horrible, and it's not a pleasant situation. But back to our present discussion. Around the loop here, starting with you, Martin. Any loosening of you thinking it's extraterrestrial? What I want you to tell me is Rendlesham, Mildenhall, Woodbridge, the bases that were around the Rendlesham Forest. Very interesting part of the world. Long history in that part of England of some really strange things that went on there. Any possibility that it's other than extraterrestrial in your mind?
I don't. Just by all the events that happened in those several days, and actually things are still happening there now. According to
Absolutely,
a lot of people. But I think that was 1980, right? 1980.
Christmas 80, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
1980. So yeah, I just can't imagine that some of the technology that they were describing, and especially when Halt says they saw that thing that looked like an eyeball dripping magma, and then
Yep.
it burst into lights. I've had someone else tell me that I had an office with, they saw something burst into lights. He's not the only one into 5 lights. So it's a bizarre, just unexplainable. I can't tell you if it's extraterrestrial, but whatever it was something that we're not familiar with, I believe. And, when that thing came down to his feet and he recorded it on that audio, that's pretty darn interesting to me, that whole situation.
I agree.
So I don't think it was ours or our adversaries' technology, in my own opinion.
Let me ask you this, Martin, if I could. Do you believe that some of the pilots that have encountered some of these crafts, because I've been told that pilots who have got too close to these crafts have gotten some physical damage to them. Gary Nolan talks about MRIs that were given to him by the government.
Yeah.
They were possibly pilots. So do you think that that's possibly, something that we're making up, or do you think these pilots are actually getting injured by some of these crafts?
Yeah, I mean, it would be off to me. I think, I don't know how anyone else thinks, but it seems like it's such a fleeting thing. It would be very unusual that they could actually have something physically happen to them from something near their craft and gone in such a quick way. Possibly, it's possible. I would think that someone that had a close encounter of something that was on the ground and walked up to it and was touching it, like Jim Peniston claims he did, that type of thing would definitely get some type of effect. But you do hear about a lot of this, and I recently had a guy on my show that had a USO, an underwater encounter that had very bad health effects, and I'm sending. Hopefully, he's going to be Gary's going to be checking him out too as well. So, yeah, one of the, if I can just jag from this question for a second.
Absolutely.
At some point, I wanted to find out what you thought about Ryan Graves' encounter of the bubble in the cube inside a bubble, the thing that he saw many times. We could do that in another show, but
Yep, but I find it an amazing report. I mean, I like many of you, when you look at television programs or read books, I look for the authenticity or the relatability to what pilots and aircrew are saying. And this description passes all those marks to me on that. One of the things that I find interesting about shapes and when things take shapes, it's easy for me to accept that if you're working this kind of technology, whatever its origin is, you have the ability to change the physical interaction, what you're going to see. You're going to have the ability to change. We may think that the radar on the Princeton is, and it is, and it's very impressive. Aegis is a very impressive system. But if you have this capability, whatever its origin is, you're going to also have the ability to warp the physics that we're operating under. You're going to have power and the ability to change how things appear around whatever the craft is. You're going to have that because you're going to have a large amount of power on a wide spectrum of uses, from the IR all the way into the infrared. You're going to have physical heat or physical cooling that's going to warp light and change that. So I am very impressed and very, very interested when you get into these shapes. Now, of course, everyone likes to make a little bit of fun of me because of my absolute craziness on the triangle aircraft. I'm pretty sure triangle aircraft, when we get into that discussion, this is all terrestrial. It's connected to a lot of trying techniques to create that. But in this particular case, I tell you, Martin, this one really gets my attention because, again, like Fravor, like John, they're giving a very accurate readback of what they saw and experienced based against their life experience at that time. And when you look at these particular people, what they did, in the case of John, he is a Air Force security policeman. So he has a certain way that he's approaching. He knows what he has to do when he comes to the scene of something like this, be it any kind of an incident, any kind of an event. Same thing with these aviators. So it really gets my attention. I do think it's well worth doing a show on that. We'll make a point of it. And maybe in the new year we can grab it pretty early on.
Great.
Okay. Well, that was interesting. Don, what do you think about the pilots being injured?
Well, I wanted to get back to Bentwaters for a minute.
Okay, let's do that.
It has an interesting tie back to Bill Lear.
Yeah, we were talking.
John Lear.
You had asked, do we think it was ET or something else? Before we even go there, we got to look at what was happening in the world in December 1980, because Bentwaters was a basically forward operating base in the event conflict broke out from the Soviet Union in Europe. Look, the Russians, the Soviet Union, had just invaded Afghanistan. There were massive nuclear demonstrations going on all over the British Isles, which, among other things, meant that there were a lot of KGB operatives there. Bentwaters housed tactical nuclear weapons in the event of a Soviet invasion roaring through the Fulda Gap. Those weapons were available to be used. Now, what did that mean? That meant that in the event hostilities broke out, they could look to incursions by Soviet Spetsnaz. And that would have been a very bad thing. Also, Poland was on the verge of a revolution. Okay, remember Lech Walesa and all that business? The Russians, the fear was they would do a 1956 Hungarian replay in Poland with Soviet tanks. It was touch and go. Okay. And then this thing happened. And then the aftermath, the drugging and the interrogations and the spooky Men in Black type deals that were purportedly going on. So I got to tell you, Commander Cobra and everybody else, I don't know. I initially thought, well, it wouldn't be out of line to suggest there was some type of an outside incursion happening there. But when I looked at everything else that was going on at the time, boy, I'll tell you what, that basically screwed up my thinking about this. So I'm not sure. And I know, Commander, I know that you are aware of everything I just said. And I'm presuming that Chris is aware. But Martin, I'm not sure. Martin, did you take everything else into account with what was happening there then at that period of time? Were you aware?
No, I would say in 1980, and what I was doing, I was in California as a park ranger. I wasn't really paying much attention to world news at the time. So no, I'm not aware of but I did hear about, the solidarity and Lex Luenza, however you say his name. I remember hearing about all that type of situation in Poland that going on at the time. But, I never tied the two together, if that's what you mean.
We were a very short way from potentially an earth-shattering conflict with the Russians at that time, because we had just gone through 4 years of President Carter. Carter, managed to screw up because of their roles of engagement and all the other business with rescuing our diplomatic people in Tehran. We were seen as a paper tiger by a lot of the world, the running dog imperialist, were really only a paper tiger. And with everything else that was happening, the right spark could have lit it all. Commander Cobra, do you agree with that?
Yep, I do. And it doesn't surprise me. And one of the things I was bringing up to you was John Lear says this was one of the events that changed his thinking on UFOs, because he spoke to a friend of his that was an Air Force pilot stationed at Bentwaters. And Bentwaters locked down, as you would expect. And that's a big deal when you get locked down, especially around a holiday. I mean, holidays in the military, and especially this particular holiday season, with the amounts of times that people take off and take leave and all those kinds of things, that was a big deal. And it also is a big deal how well it was controlled, how well it was, it didn't extend further out past this event. There wasn't a lot of discourse that came out about this lockdown. Now, as someone who served over in Europe and for the last part of the Cold War, it wasn't uncommon for these kinds of events to occur. We practiced every 3 months for some kind of a major battle. You wore all your gear. If you lived off base, you moved back onto the base. There was all kinds of stuff that you went through. And then when Don was speaking, but I always think about Rendlesham, I always think about John in describing to me that after he had heard this friend of his that was, I believe, a pilot in the Air Force describe what was going on and the events and the scuttlebutt that went on around it, that's what got him convinced in extraterrestrials and that we weren't being told the truth. Don, can you back me up on that? Do you remember?
Absolutely, yes. He knew this guy, this pilot, from when he was flying contract airlines for the CIA.
Yep.
In Southeast Asia. And
in the U.S. He had a very interesting career of moving things around the U.S.
Yeah.
For the very types of bases and mission you were talking about.
Right.
I'd like to say something about what Martin was saying about the incident where Holt said he was drugged. That brought up something that I don't know if you've heard of a guy by the name of Terry Lovelace. He wrote
Oh
the
yeah.
book
Oh, yeah.
I know
Incident
Terry.
Devil's Den. Right. Terry was drugged. Terry was in the Air Force. Terry was in a hospital bed with ionized radiation burns after his incident. And they came in and they threatened him. They took him out. They drugged him, everything else. I mean, so that doesn't, it sounds exactly like Terry Lovelace's type of situation where, they take these military people and Commander Cobra and I talked about it in the beginning of the show. The U.S. government is not afraid to take military people and do things for them, do things to them, and then turn around and tell them to keep their mouths shut, or else you're going to lose your pension, you're going to lose your life. I mean, here's the biggest thing that nobody has talked about, and I wanted to bring this up with David Grush. He has absolutely said on numerous podcasts that people have died, been murdered over this ufology, UFO thing. So how bad does this go where they would drug people? They would, destroy people's careers. They would put disinformation out.
Well, they've been doing it for 70 years, Chris. They've been doing it for 70 years.
Right. But I mean, it's nefarious now. I mean, it's
always been nefarious. It's always been nefarious, and this is the important part because it ties into a lot of stuff that we've talked about on this show today. If the coming disclosure, and we all have our opinion if we're going to live to see it, okay, and I wish everyone that's listening and my three co-hosts the longest epoch of time on this planet before we go to the next to our next reward. But my point is, if this is as pivotal, as cataclysmic as it could be, or if the lie and the cover-up is exposed, this is why people are being drugged. This is why people are being discredited. It is happening for other items outside of our debate, our discussion here, for a lot lesser things. People's reputations, lives are ruined, threats are made. It comes down to power. That's where I will always reside. Power is what begets this kind of behavior. You take the most important things that you want to maintain, right? We want security. We have a military to provide us the security to keep the bad guys from doing bad things to us. And then you start to get derivatives out of that. And then you eventually end up with people being wrongly pressed, wrongly treated because they were there and it was their night or their position that they were at when this occurred. I think it's evolved in some instances. I think it's become a much more difficult thing than it was 50, 60, 70 years ago to tell people. But since, the military is nothing more than a cross-section of the society that it draws its members from, you have people much smarter. I hear military leaders now talking about how difficult it is to work with the new inductees in the military because you can't just say something like they did in our day, Chris, Don, and Martin, in your case as well, and you just went along with it. Now these kids take out their phone, which I affectionately call a tricorder to my kids, to force them to look up on their phones what a tricorder is because they never connected it to Star Trek, and look up the facts. Now, those facts might not be accurate, but they can counter pretty quickly when somebody in authority says something pretty stupid. They can immediately get a read how accurate something is. And you now have the ability, if you want to document and make uploadable films between the app and the capability that's on a phone, you can make a quality production and have it into the internet in moments, right?
In moments, yeah.
That has completely changed the piece of how we're doing business. It's made the world unsettled. And I think the folks that are still got their hands on the controls here are really getting into a death grip, and that's why you have these kinds of things come up. I saw Julian Assange's name. I don't care where you stand where Assange is. One thing I will always say about whistleblowers or people that come forward or when evidence is found, okay? Sometimes in court, they'll call it the fruit of the poisonous tree, right? Because they found the evidence, or the evidence came by a way that didn't follow proper legal procedure. You still have to deal with the information after it's out there. When whistleblowers come forward, you still have to deal with what they're saying. You may not like it. You may claim that they have put people's lives that are on the pointy end of the stick at danger. Nothing makes me crazier when we get to that, but you have to deal with the information that has come forward. You have to evaluate if it's factual, and then what do we do about that?
I can tell you that. Go ahead.
Are you sure? No.
Yeah, go.
Go. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, no, I just I had talked when we started that I wanted to play a clip of Bob Escher, and the reason I wanted to, he was a semi whistleblower of the day, NASA former NASA guy. But the reason I wanted to play the clip, and I know we're running low on time here, is that it's kind of going to make you look at the 1980s when this was recorded and say everything's basically the same. It's pretty. There's a lot of similarities to what is right now. Is it okay if I play it?
Sure.
Yeah, run it and just give us a couple of minutes at the end so we can close.
Yeah, it's let's see. I think it's 2 minutes. 2.5
governments, the Canadian government, the American government, if they are in possession of spacecraft, if they have made contact with aliens, why don't they tell us?
What I was able to learn is that the issue of secrecy dates back into the early 1950s, and in 1959, actually, NASA had a study conducted by the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., addressing the issue of whether this alarming issue of a confrontation with an extraterrestrial culture should be released to the public, this information. It was determined that there would be grave consequences for just an overt public pronouncement by government officials. So a determination...
What does that mean? We would all panic?
Well, not necessarily just panic, but the issues that it presented, not only theology, but issues involving economics, standards of monetary concerns. If you acknowledge type of technology that renders fossil fuel-related industries obsolete, for example, you have grave consequences economically all the way around the world.
Of course you do. All our values are rendered
so the determination was made that the only way to avoid this chaos would be through a slow indoctrination process over a matter of decades.
You really believe? Have you had a close encounter, as they say, or have you seen UFOs?
Well, I wouldn't really call it a close encounter. I think it has more to do with the contacts I've had with the U.S. intelligence community and being a technologist, being called in to analyze various video films and photographic evidence. It's quite conclusive to me. I have, in fact, seen with my own eyes on quite a number of occasions, well over 20, at very close range, a number of these vehicles. It's quite extraordinary technology. Anybody interested in technology would be, it's like a kid in a candy store, really.
And there's no way that you could be mistaken and it could have been an airplane, helicopter, or something of that nature?
Well, Admiral Inman convinced me that these vehicles were not manufactured by human technology, so that's pretty conclusive for me.
Do you think, though, that the government know this is happening, know that it's going on, but why don't they want the rest of us to know? Why do they not want that?
Yes, you are correct. The government, many governments around the world do in fact know. In fact, NATO conducted a study in the 60s involving quite a number of these incidents. The decisions to maintain secrecy regarding this center more around not upsetting the economic apple cart, religion, theology issues that come into play, and quite a number of issues that essentially center around science and technology.
That's it.
By the way, I am the guy
Yes,
that found that document, the Brookings Institute. I had received a call about 1992 from Professor Stan McDaniel, who at that time was on a rampage with NASA because the 1993 Mars mission was originally going to be lifted off without benefit of a camera. And at that time, there was a tremendous amount of public outcry about the so-called face on Mars, okay, the Mars face. And he and Richard Hoagland, Dick Hoagland, were both working on that. And they called up and and I was the director of research at UFO Magazine. And they said, hey, Don, basically, here's the deal. Supposedly, there was an academic study that was created for NASA right after President Eisenhower created NASA. He basically took all the rocket programs away from the military services, put them under the auspices of a civilian agency, and it was originally meant to be the most open federal agency in existence. But there's a document out there. Could you find it? So I started doing some research and I located it. It was the Brookings Institute document. And I provided that to them. And Exler was absolutely correct. Around page 216 of that document, basically, the conclusions, they were all academics, all right, that they came to was at this point in time, and we're talking very early 1960s, 61, 62, if we come across either actual extraterrestrials or extraterrestrial artifacts, once we step out into the solar system, what do we do? Okay, do we suppress this information or do we release at least part of it to the public? And they came to the conclusion that if they released the information, number one, there would be two groups of humans that would be adversely affected. Number one, religious individuals. Okay, fundamentalist religious individuals.
Don, I think most of it, Don, but most of it on. I want to pick this up when we bring the new show because I think the Brookings document is a good one. We're running up against it, and I don't want to jam it and cut it short.
Okay,
because I think the insights you got are spot on, and I think it explains why people sold out not to let that come out, and possibly people think we're more sophisticated 40 years later. But going around the horn, I want to wish the best of the holidays to my co-host and to the fantastic people that are in our chat room and that show up every week for it. To KGRADB for all the great work and bringing this show together. Billy Skywatcher, our producer for this and creator of this show. God's peace to everybody out there that surpasses all knowledge and understanding. My favorite sign up from when I ran a show. And I'd like to give my co-host the opportunity to run around the horn in our last minute and a half, 2 minutes, to put their Christmas wishes out as well. Martin.
Merry Christmas, everyone. I actually have another show coming up before then. Tuesday, as always, Chris Aubeck next week. But Merry Christmas to everyone for those that just watch or listen to KGRA radio. And have a wonderful time. And we won't be back before the first of the year either, right? So happy New Year as well.
We'll be off until the first of the year.
Right.
Chris?
I just want to wish all the audience out there, especially the people in chat, thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for engaging with us because we love to be controversial. We might not always like or you like what we say, but we try to make it entertaining and informative. But I also want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And I hope you have a wonderful season.
And Don, our anchor man.
Yeah, the angry grandfather.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Grinch that stole the UAP but brought it back.
That's right.
And
a very Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year. And we will be dark until the new year. But hey, we got a brand new year coming up. and I'm sure the controversy will not stop. So, with that being said, happy holidays.
And they're all full of bull crap.
That's bullshit, Chris. Bullshit.
Let's see if we
I'm
can
trying to
distance
keep
the crap and Christmas. If we could just keep a little space between, the birth of Christianity and then the remembrance and the spirit of that, and maybe we could leave the other part out. It's great. I thank everybody in the chat room. And if Bill Skywatcher is listening and he wants to jump on, Bill, we want to thank you for putting this together. And we look forward to what's coming up in 24.
Whoops. There he is.
Well, that was a salute.
Wow. That was a long speech.
Take us out, Bill.
From UAP Crossfire till 2024. Thank you for a great start, gentlemen.